This Week, I'm Beverley O'Connor. Coming up, international concern grows over the coronavirus as multiple countries attempt to deal with new outbreaks. A momentous verdict for the Me Too movement as Harvey Weinstein is found guilty of sexual assault and rape. And how children are bearing the burden of the final phase of the Syrian war. Well, global concern over the coronavirus continues to grow as multiple countries outside China battle worsening outbreaks. South Korea has been one of the hardest hit, with authorities testing hundreds of thousands of people for the disease. Bill Birtle reports from Daegu.
Driving through the worst affected province in Korea's south, constant emergency alerts. The coronavirus crisis here is deepening fast. At first glance, the main outbreak city, Daegu, looks fairly normal, but the hospitals tell otherwise.
This is a temporary screening station to take temperature checks, and if you look around, they've actually set up tents going back for quite a long way.
Some here are heeding warnings to protect themselves.
I'm trying not to leave the house, but when I do, I always wear a mask.
Others, though, like this fruit seller outside the hospital, aren't worried.
If you've got a chronic disease, it's probably dangerous, but otherwise I wouldn't be too concerned.
Medical staff are working around the clock, and Daegu's government has appealed for extra supplies and personnel. City officials have also apologised for distributing masks in a way that led to this massive line.
Inside this hospital, there are more than 200 people with the virus. They've cleared out all other patients. It's now a dedicated facility for treating COVID-19. And it's just one of the hospitals here preparing for a big influx of patients.
In Seoul, the government is making a big show of disinfecting the parliament. But Korea's government appears reluctant to lock down Daegu and stop people travelling out.
Does this virus have pandemic potential? Absolutely, it has. Are we there yet? From our assessment, not yet.
Whether Korea is really willing to take tougher measures to stop the spread is still unclear. The death toll here is relatively low, but all agree the number of infections will only rise further. Bill Birtles, ABC News, Daegu.
And in Italy, strict quarantine measures are starting to take a toll on the economy of the country's prosperous north. Our Europe correspondent Linton Besser reports from Milan.
It's the centre of the fashion world, but right now no one is buying.
There is nobody coming in, so we are here talking to each other about coronavirus, because in these days this is the main argument.
You are the only one that come in the store
today you are the only one. Yeah.
I'm the only person that came in your shop today.
Yeah, today, yes.
And that's a major problem for the Italian economy. The latest victim, Milan's world-famous furniture design fair.
The first time that it happens that we have to postpone the date of Salone, but what can we do against health, against nature?
Schools, universities and theatres have been closed in Milan. Even churches were forced to shut their doors and cancel Ash Wednesday services.
One of the greatest challenges for authorities here in Italy is not so much controlling the spread of the disease as controlling the spread of panic.
Sydney-sider Ethan Rizos has been told not to come into work at his Milan office, where his company makes biomedical devices. As the coronavirus spread through Italy, he saw firsthand how panicked people became.
There was no toilet paper. It was definitely out. Toilet paper, meat, dairy, pasta, legumes. I could only get fresh fruit and vegetables and basically the canned stuff, like the jarred stuff like olives and sun-dried tomatoes. I was taking photos and everything because it's something completely strange to me.
The number of infections has also been rising elsewhere in Europe, with confirmed cases in Croatia, in Greece and in France, where Carnival was cut short. Events like this deemed just too risky. In Tenerife on the Canary Islands, a hotel has been quarantined after an Italian guest tested positive. A luxury holiday turned into a stressful ordeal for some.
We have not got it. We've been tested. We haven't got it. Bring us home.
Although there are worse places to be locked up. Officials here in Italy are still trying to discover how the virus took hold. The public is simply hoping the lockdown will soon come to an end. Linton Besser, ABC News, Milan.
Harvey Weinstein's conviction for sexual assault and rape was seen as a major victory for the Me Too movement that inspired women to go public with misconduct allegations against powerful men. At least 80 women had accused the former movie producer of sexual misconduct, stretching back decades. Our North America correspondent David Lipson.
Mr. Weinstein, are you working on any movies?
This is the day a movie giant came crashing to earth.
Good morning, Harvey. Think there'll be a verdict today?
After decades of whispers in Hollywood backlots about the way he treats women behind closed doors, the truth is now beyond reasonable doubt.
Weinstein is a vicious serial sexual predator who used his power to threaten, rape, assault, trick, humiliate and silence his victims.
His method of pressuring aspiring stars became public in 2017 with the release of secretly recorded audio.
Please, I'm not going to do anything. I swear on my children. Please come in. On everything. I'm a famous guy.
I'm feeling very uncomfortable right now.
Please come in now.
Today, the woman who recorded it was outside court, vindicated and more enthusiastic than ever about the Me Too movement.
This is an example for many to follow. Someone that even this powerful, can never treat people in that way that he did and think he would never be prosecuted.
The two women in this case gave graphic and emotional evidence about their assaults in 2006 and 2013. Weinstein was found guilty of third-degree rape and a criminal sexual act, but the jury found him not guilty of the more serious charge of predatory sexual assault.
These survivors weren't just brave, they were heroic.
Every day for the past month, Harvey Weinstein has shuffled out of this courthouse, down these stairs, past the media throng and into his waiting car. Well, not today. He was handcuffed in court and led straight to jail to be sentenced on March 11th. One charge carries a maximum 4 years in prison, the other up to 25, and he still has to face court in LA.
Yeah, it was worth it.
David Lipson, ABC News, New York.
The US government has laid out its case for Julian Assange to be extradited to the US to face charges of espionage and hacking. Lawyers for the WikiLeaks founder failed in a bid to have him sit in the courtroom rather than a bulletproof glass-fronted dock for the remainder of his extradition hearing. Our Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports from London.
With a smaller crowd of supporters outside, Julian Assange returned to the dock amid claims of mistreatment. The court heard he was handcuffed 11 times and his legal documents confiscated by guards at the London prison where he's being held.
Yesterday, Julian strip searched for no reason we can understand, put in 5 different holding cells.
A treatment that is unacceptable and surely must contravene all human rights conventions.
The 48-year-old was showing signs of strain in the court. Assange told his lawyers he was struggling and finding it difficult to concentrate.
His health is a concern. I think you can see from the way he appears in court that he's really not well.
The defence declared it was unravelling the US case that Assange had placed lives at risk by publishing unredacted cables, telling the court the Australian had tried to contact Hillary Clinton and the White House when he realised the secret documents were about to be dumped on the internet by someone other than WikiLeaks.
The idea that the United States government is seeking extradition of Julian Assange when the United States government, failed to take any action is really unfathomable.
Assange's defence team say the case against him is lies, lies and more lies, and it's not a proper or fair extradition request by the US government. That's the basis for the defence.
the US government is lying?
Well, it's more than just allegation, because it's supported by facts. It's supported by publicly available documents.
Lawyers for the United States say that's absurd, and there's a clear, unequivocal legal basis for charging Assange. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
The Indian capital remains on edge after days of rioting left more than 30 people dead, hundreds more injured. Muslim families in the affected areas are evacuating their homes, and businesses are worried that they will never recover. Here's our South Asia correspondent, James Oaten.
After days of rioting, parts of northeastern Delhi have been left a smouldering wreck. Cars have been torched and businesses burned to the ground.
I was really sad to see all this. My friend had borrowed money and invested in his shop here. They now have nothing left.
Footage of Hindu mobs terrorising homes and mosques in recent days has been circulating on social media. Now some Muslim families say they don't feel safe.
It is a hard time. Non-Muslims are a majority in this locality. Therefore, it's very hard for them to live here.
India's top court has come down hard on police, accusing the force of failing to do enough to curb the violence and arrest the instigators.
Senior officers are on rounds, extra forces have been given, and a lot of confidence-building measures are being taken.
Protesters have been occupying several streets in Delhi, campaigning against a law that gives priority citizenship to non-Muslims from certain neighbouring countries. When some protesters tried to move into new territory earlier this week, they were met with violence. Over the past few days, rival groups have been carrying out tit-for-tat attacks.
Hindus, Muslims, we're all scared. We live together and support each other. Together we stopped outsiders from entering into our local area.
Even if authorities can get on top of the latest unrest, there are still several streets that have been occupied since last year. So the question remains, how do you resolve that issue without causing another eruption of violence? The latest unrest forced the Supreme Court to push back a hearing that was meant to discuss that very topic. James Oaten, ABC News, Delhi.
Egypt's former dictator Hosni Mubarak has died 9 years after he was ousted from power in the biggest popular uprising of the Arab Spring. His closeness with the West and his support for a peace treaty with Israel helped secure billions of dollars a year in American aid. But poverty and corruption sparked opposition that eventually led to his downfall.
For decades, Hosni Mubarak was a key figure in Middle East politics. A former Air Force officer who came to power after his predecessor Anwar Sadat was assassinated, he reformed Egypt's economy but became a brutal autocrat who turned the country into a cruel police state. Hosni Mubarak suppressed an Islamist insurgency that murdered dozens of foreign tourists and was supported by Western nations as a stable ruler in an unstable region. But he failed to deliver promised political and social reforms, and widespread anger saw him forced out of power by Egypt's military in 2011. Hosni Mubarak was sentenced to life in prison for conspiring to murder 239 protesters in the uprising against his rule, but was cleared by an appeals court in 2017. Unlike the people who disappeared in his prisons, he died a free man, and Egypt will have 3 formal days of mourning to mark his passing.
Malaysia remains in political limbo with its 94-year-old former Prime Minister acting as caretaker until a new government can be formed. Malaysia's parliament is expected to pick a new Prime Minister on Monday. Our Southeast Asia correspondent, Ann Barker.
Malaysia has been plunged into political chaos. A day after Mahathir Mohamad tendered his shock resignation, we're no closer to knowing who will be the next Prime Minister or exactly why he resigned. We do know that last Friday a meeting of the ruling coalition Pakatan Harapan was expected to decide a date for Mahathir to hand power to his anointed successor, Anwar Ibrahim, in line with a promise to step down after 2 years. But there was no decision other than Mahathir reiterating it wouldn't be before November, by which time he'd be 95. But over the weekend, we suddenly learned that members of the ruling coalition were in talks with the main opposition party UMNO, and that some in the government, including Anwar Ibrahim's own party, wanted to dissolve the government and form a new coalition with UMNO and Mahathir continuing as PM, supposedly to block Anwar Ibrahim from ever taking power. But suddenly yesterday it seemed those plotting against him lacked the numbers to form a new coalition. Anwar Ibrahim himself claims Mahathir told him he hadn't supported a coup and didn't want to join a coalition with UMNO, the very party he'd ousted from power 2 years ago. But very soon after, he resigned as Prime Minister and as chairman of his party, Bersatu, leaving more questions than answers. The King has now asked Mahathir Mohamad to stay on as an interim Prime Minister for up to 10 days until a new coalition can be installed. Several coalition parties want Mahathir Mohamad to stay in the top job, but it remains to be seen if he'll agree or if he has the support of enough minor parties to form government. Or indeed if Anwar Ibrahim could somehow muster the support to form his own government. If not, it's entirely possible that another election could be on the cards.
Well, after 9 brutal years of civil war, the conflict in Syria is entering a devastating final phase. Millions of civilians are under siege as the Syrian government, backed by Russia, tries to bring the last rebel-held province to heel. At the same time, nearly 1 million refugees, a third of them children, are freezing in crude camps. This report from Middle East correspondent Eric Torchek.
Nine years of war has reduced much of Syria to rubble. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and more than 11 million displaced. But the war's final phase is becoming the most devastating of all.
We have war injuries coming to the head and chest and abdomen and limbs.
3 million civilians are trapped under bombardment by the Syrian government and the Russian Air Force as they attempt to retake Idlib province from rebels.
In the past few weeks, daily we are facing these injuries because the bombs is increasing day by day.
As the fighting intensifies, the stream of wounded seen by surgeon Mohammed Abrush grows.
What is happening in Idlib really something unbelievable. They are attacking the civilians, and most of the injuries is coming really through the children and women. And all those civilians, they have no way to escape from this war. The total number of the dead will be increased. The total number of injured will be increased. No medication, no medical staff to help those people. So it will be very worse.
Almost 1 million people have fled the besieged city to these refugee camps on the border with Turkey. A third of them are children.
This is a burden which is being borne by children in the most appalling of conditions, with no real end in sight.
The refugees are trapped in freezing conditions in the mountains.
وضعي تعبان كثير يا ابني والله، يعني لا خبز مو متوفر كثير، حاطه بشفت نعالج هدوم نعالج شيء ومي قليله ولا سكر لا شيء لا زيت، تعرف حالتنا مو ميته والله.
The children now, they don't have their milk. The children, they don't have their nutrition. The weather last week, it was very bad. It was minus. So really the situation is very bad.
The main rebel group in Idlib is listed as a terrorist organisation by the UN and Australia. But Turkey, which is desperate to prevent the flow of refugees, is arming some rebels.
Selamünaleyküm warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Değerli kardeşlerim, şu arkamızda gördüğünüz Suriye rejimine ait helikopter. Bu helikopterler burada özgür bölgelerdeki Müslümanları.
Russia and the Syrian government say they are determined to defeat the rebels. It could eventually end the civil war, but will exact a terrible toll on the people of Idlib.
Until there is a military victory on the part of the Assad regime, we are going to see this civilian catastrophe continue to unfold. It is a fight to the death as far as these groups are concerned.
Just we are depending on God. If the God will save us, it's okay. Otherwise, we prefer to die. Better than live in this situation.
Well, in times of global environmental crises, it's food supplies which are often the first to suffer. But since 2008, a team of scientists and researchers have been collecting and storing seeds from practically every country in the world on an island deep in the Arctic. And they've just welcomed their 1 millionth edition. Here's Rachel Merritt.
Hidden deep in snow, this building houses the world's most important collection of seeds. It's known as the Doomsday Vault, and the doors of this facility rarely open. But now the vault has received 60,000 new additions, bringing the total number of specimens to more than 1 million.
It's from Israel.
The latest delivery includes offerings from India, Mali, Peru, as well as specimens harvested from the meadows of Prince Charles's residence in Highgrove. Executive Director of the Crop Trust, Stefan Schmitz, said the seed vault is the ultimate insurance policy. As the pace of climate change and biodiversity loss increases, there is new urgency surrounding efforts to save food crops at risk of extinction. With the threat of erratic weather patterns linked to climate change, nuclear war, drought and disease, the seeds in the collection are vital to safeguarding global food supplies. They also serve as backups for plant breeders to experiment with new varieties of crop. But the collection isn't just for doomsday. In 2015, seeds were withdrawn for the first time after crops in the Syrian city of Aleppo were damaged due to civil war. The sub-zero climate means the seed collection will be protected even if power fails to the facility. But even the vault itself hasn't been immune to the threat of climate change. Norway recently invested $11 million to upgrade the facility after melted permafrost flooded the entrance. Rachel Merritt, ABC News.
A Cambodian politician has referred a criminal case against Australian Christian missionary Martin Chan to the country's Prime Minister Hun Sen. Mr Chan is facing fraud charges even though he had already been cleared of wrongdoing by an arbitration panel. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Amy Bainbridge reports from Phnom Penh.
Sydney man Martin Chan spent 3 months in a Cambodian prison on the outskirts of Phnom Penh. He's facing trial over a charge of fraud. Martin Chan was a volunteer manager for a school construction project on behalf of a Christian-run organisation called His International Services. The project ran out of money halfway through, and the local Cambodian construction company claims it still owed more than $2 million. The case was settled through arbitration in 2017, but now Martin Chan is facing a criminal charge of fraud. Mr Chan's wife, Deborah Kim, has written to a local politician about the case. Sok Savan Vatana Sabwang has taken an interest and he's prepared a report which he's referred to the top legal authority here in Cambodia, the Supreme Consultative Council. It's expected to consider the report, but ultimately a decision will be in the hands of the Prime Minister Hun Sen as to whether he will intervene in Mr Chan's case.
I'm hoping the government will take a look at the case and then they may be able to dismiss the case if possible. It will draw public attention, and also he's quite proactive in helping other people as well. So I hope that he may be able to help me on this case.
Martin Chan is out on bail, but he's not a free man. He can't leave Cambodia and he can't change address while the case is still afoot. He's still waiting further legal advice as to when a trial date will be set. And if the Prime Minister doesn't intervene, it could be still a very long road ahead for Mr Chan and his supporters.
Well, as Bougainville inches towards independence, the women on the island are pushing to ensure their voices keep being heard. Unlike most of its neighbours, the aspiring nation has a long history of having women in charge. They own most of the land and make most of the community decisions. And as our PNG correspondent Natalie Whiting reports, these widows of war want to turn their matriarchal roles into positions in Parliament.
In this village, the women own all the land and call the shots.
As the women, we make decisions for our land.
Unlike a lot of Papua New Guinea, Bougainville is a largely matrilineal society. All of the leaders here in Savuna are women.
In matrilineal society, women are the main decision-making body.
The women here live off their land. They sell excess produce in the nearby town to pay for things like their children's school fees or medical needs.
We go down to the market early 4 o'clock, and so we normally carry our veggies at the back, knapsack.
It's tough, mainly after the crisis, especially after the crisis. And nowadays you can see that women, we are the most hardworking people in the community.
Every village was affected by the Bougainville crisis, which is thought to have killed as many as 20,000 people in the 80s and 90s.
Most women in my village, they are widows because of the Bougainville crisis.
In the aftermath, the women here stepped up to run the village on their own. But that's not something that's reflected on a larger scale. Despite the matrilineal tradition, men still hold most of the decision-making roles in Bougainville's local parliament. Women are significantly underrepresented in politics across the Pacific. In Papua New Guinea, there are currently no women in parliament. In Bougainville's local parliament, 3 seats are reserved for women, and a 4th woman was voted in at the last election.
Definitely, I'd really like to see more women in the government level.
Bougainville will be having local elections this year. Magdalene Torowansi plans to run for president.
Many women are going to run for elections. Give us a few more years. I think women will get there.
As Bougainville grapples with possible independence from Papua New Guinea, women want a seat at the table. Natalie Whiting, ABC News, Savuna.
And that's the program. You can head to the ABC's World News page for all the latest international headlines. And do join me on The World weeknights on the ABC News channel. I'm Bev O'Connor. Thanks for your company. Bye-bye.